Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Wednesday Palaver. Tonight, we're going to be discussing something outside the boundaries of Ghana. We're going to be discussing George Floyd and racism in the United States of America. And we are particularly privileged to have with us this evening a gentleman who happens to be the secretary of the Socialist Forum of Ghana and who is also a historian. Indeed, we have often described him as the official historian of the Socialist Forum of Ghana. We are going to be looking at racism in the United States of America from its historical perspective. We are going to look at the politics of racism, and we will be looking at the economics of racism. Wednesday Palaver is a forum that we have put together, which normally is held at the Freedom Center in Kokomimble in Accra. But because of COVID and all the COVID restrictions, we've decided now to bring it to the studio. It is going to last for an hour, and in that hour, the lead presenter, Justice Hineku, is going to speak to us about 20-25 minutes. And thereafter, we're going to be taking messages from social media. We're going to be taking messages from Facebook, messages from YouTube, messages on the WhatsApp platform, and all the other platforms. And then after that, he will come back to the microphone, and then he will try to answer and discuss some of the issues which will be raised. And then thereafter, we'll come to the studio audience for audience participation. And then we'll run up with concluding remarks. Just to remind those of you at home that anybody and everybody can join us in the studio. All you have to do is to send a message to the producer using the telephone numbers you find on the screen, and you'll be invited to participate in this discussion of local and international happenings. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome Justice Hineku to lead us in a discussion on George Floyd and racism in the United States of America. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Kwesi, and a good evening to all comrades and friends who are here in Gadet. I'm going to talk about George Floyd and racism in the USA, but I would dwell more on who racism is, about the history of racism, and in particular, the history of racism also in the United States. I try to demystify certain notions about racism and slavery, etc., and racism, whether it's genetic or it's a social construct. What I'll be going through is an introduction. Indeed, the oppression and suppression of the black people who live in the United States, and not only black people, of all persons of color who live in the United States, has been ongoing since the time the Europeans actually went to the so-called New World, met some people there, the Amerindians, and started suppressing them, started segregating them, started discriminating against them, using them for hard labor. And when the people were dying en masse as a result of the importation of diseases by the Europeans who went there, they had to substitute that labor in large part with the importation of African labor, who they called slaves. We understand that they were slaves because they had been reduced from human beings to just mere commodities. They had a value. It wasn't because they were no more human beings, they were still human beings. But because they had a value, they could be sold and traded in the market. So they became slaves, and they had to work as prescribed by their masters. We saw the clip on television. We realized that it was not just an ordinary incident. It was a state institution, the police, who most of the cases are involved in the wanton murder of African Americans. And you realize that in America, the oppression, the racism, I'm a bit careful about using racism till I define what racism is. The oppression of minorities especially has been ongoing for a long time. Indeed, with the black Americans, apart from them having been slaves, there was a time when they were lynched. I mean, they were lynched by vigilantes. I'm sure you've heard of the Ku Klux Klan. They were white vigilantes, especially in the South, because they were opposed to the fact that the slaves had been emancipated. And then when the slaves were emancipated, it meant an economic loss for the owners of the slaves, in the south of the southern part of the United States. So they formed this kind of vigilantes. They formed these vigilantes in order to ensure that politically the blacks couldn't come up the political ladder. They formed this kind of vigilantes to ensure that economically they could not come up the ladder. They formed it so that socially they wouldn't mix, and then they created a justice system where now in the United States of America the greatest number of prisoners are black Americans. Indeed, a black American is more likely to be put in prison for anything which is considered even a misdemeanor in America than a white. Of course, the discrimination doesn't exist only in the judicial system, it exists in the education system. That's why at a certain time in the United States, black colleges had to come up because there was a color bar which prevented blacks and whites from mixing. It was only about 50 years ago that the color bar was removed from most of the southern states of the United States of America. Yes, the United States has had a mulatto or an African American president, but because discrimination and racism is institutionalized, it has not had much effect on how the minorities, the African Americans, the Latinos, immigrant labor are treated. And I was telling you about the importation of African slaves. It was not only African slaves who worked in the Americas in the 1700s or even the 1600s. There were white people too. They were called indentured slaves. They were white slaves, people who were owing money in Europe, England, etc., who were sent there to go and work, who were owned, till they were freed. Another form of it went to Australia, but they were mainly prisoners, etc., who went to work for a period of time and got their freedom. At a certain time, a law was made which prohibited white people from becoming slaves. But when you talk of racism, racism is a social construct. It is an economic and political construct. Racism was invented as a tool to be used by the ruling elite in order to divide the exploited class. And it's not only racism, tribalism, sectionalism, sexism, religious sectarianism. They are all tools. For example, if you go to India, you take the Hindu religion. There are 5 castes who are all assigned various workloads. Those who are priests, those who are warriors, and you have the workers, the Harijans or the untouchables. So throughout history, slavery has existed, yes indeed. Racism has been there, but racism has taken the form it has taken not because somebody was born black or somebody was born Indian. It's an invention which has been brought up and is used as a tool in order to make sure that the exploiting class, the ruling elite, can have a tool to divide. Just imagine all the exploited class in the United States of America, the working people, white and black, coming together. It will spell doom for the millionaires and the billionaires. So they have to use something to divide them. In South Africa, under apartheid, they use tribalism. Oh, you're a Zulu, you are a Xhosa, you are a Hottentot, you are not, you are different. And then, of course, they institutionalize the whites at the top of the pie. So in the United States, they've done it. And it will be interesting to note that, especially during the 19th century, there were strenuous attempts by scientists, American white scientists, to prove a scientific, or to postulate a scientific validity for racism, for blacks being inferior and whites being superior. But practice itself showed that that was not true. What practice showed that? The practice of the material wealth which was built in the United States of America basically on black labor, whether it was the skyscrapers, whether it was the cotton fields, agriculture, etc., etc. The kind of labor which went in. And most of the time when we read our miswritten history, it is as if the slave trade only concentrated on raw labor, physical labor. That is not true, because those who were taken out, the immigrants or black immigrants who were forcibly taken out to the Americas and elsewhere, were young people like you, who had the intellectual abilities, who had the physical brawn. And it is both the physical brawn and the intellectual ability combined which creates the material wealth for our society to be able to exist or, thrive on. And those were the people who went there. But from Thomas Jefferson, and black people took part in the War of Independence against British oppression. I mean, the British monarchy and the British people were oppressing the refugees and the immigrants who had left Europe to go and settle in America. Of course, they were also oppressing the American Indians. But when the War of Independence started, there were black people in the army who fought on both sides, fought for the revolutionaries and fought for the British. As most of the people who fought for the British later on were resettled in Canada. But a lot of the people who fought for the revolutionaries settled in the North. So they escaped the slavery of the South. The slavery of the South was an economic system. They depended on that free labor and minimal investment in order to make their money. At a certain time, there was a contradiction between slave owning and the capitalist production relations, which was based upon labor sold at the market. Labor was part of the factors of production, and they needed labor to move, just like they needed capital to be able to move. So they could not coexist with the system in the South. Mind you, hundreds of or thousands of years ago, the Roman Empire was built on slavery. Greece was built on slavery. But it had changed into feudalism, and now capitalist relations were coming up. So it could not coexist with that in the South. And it was that contradiction which forced the those in the north of the United States to fight to change the system in the South. It was not because of goodwill. It was the same reasons why 60 years earlier, around 1807, the British had abolished the slave trade and slavery in the British Empire, because it was militating against the Industrial Revolution, which depended upon the flow of capital and of labor. The racism and the suppression of the blacks in the United States of America has been quite systematic. It is a system-based institution. The it is institutionalized politically because till the 1960s, when the Voters Registration Act was passed in the United States, most blacks, especially in the South, could not vote. Either they didn't have the literacy requirements or they didn't have the residency requirements to be allowed to vote. So although there were a lot of blacks in the South, they could not vote. About 60 years ago, there was a color bar, especially in the South and also parts of the North. I'm sure you heard of the story of Finance Minister of Ghana going to the United States and being refused to enter into a restaurant because only white people were entering there. That was Bedema. You understand? So this whole thing about racism and etc. is an institutionalized system. And like I said, politically, the blacks were suppressed and many laws were passed in order to stop them from moving upwards. But the civil rights movements in the 60s, led by Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Black Panther movement led by Kwame Ture, then known as Stokely Carmichael, all fought against this political injustice and political suppression of the black people. There was a time, like I told you, there was this Ku Klux Klan. They used to lynch black people. A black man is passing around, they'll lynch you. Indeed, something like that, although they were not lynching, something like that was happening in the Gold Coast here, where in the rich areas there, at first 6, no black person was supposed to be seen there. If you are seen there, you risk being arrested or shot because it's a place reserved for only white people. It is out of fear of repressing people that people will rebel. So maybe somebody would talk about security measures being taken by them. But they used it deliberately in order to suppress and separate a certain part. And like I've told you, it was not used only politically, it was also used economically. When you have to go and look for work, when the two of you have the same qualification, or even you're black and you have a slightly higher qualification, in the United States of America, because you are black, you are not likely to be employed. The white man will be employed. We see this manifested in tribalism elsewhere, manifested between men and women, where men are more likely to be employed, are more likely to be paid more than women are. That is what we call sexism. We see it manifested in chauvinism and bigotry. The chauvinism we saw was in South Africa not long ago, when blacks started discriminating against other blacks because they were not South Africans. Why? Because they were told that they were coming for their jobs. We did it in another form in Ghana here in 1970, when we suddenly declared that there were some people who were aliens, in spite of the fact that the Declaration of Independence, the citizenship rights, said that anybody found in Ghana at the time of independence, born in Ghana, or his parents were in Ghana, was a Ghanaian citizen. We suddenly discovered aliens because of name or facial marks or something, or dress. That's singling out people because of how they look like. So whilst elsewhere in America is because you are black, elsewhere is because you have some marks or you have some name or something, laws are made which discriminates against you. So George Floyd is a symbol not only of racism or of police brutality in America. It is not just an ordinary police brutality. Like I told you, it's institutionalized. So it is part of the police system. They recruit white people. What they teach them basically is to make their mindset to suspect anybody who is black. A black man is more likely to be a thief than a white man. But even during the riots, we realized or we saw that it was not only black people who were rioting, or I say riot, were protesting. There were a lot of white people who were also protesting against the injustices. And this against the background that there's an economic crisis in America right now because of the COVID-19. The unemployment rate is about 13%. People are being kept at home. People want to come out. You understand? So that gruesome murder right on the screens, which went to people's home, coupled with the economic problems in the United States and with the zigzag, governorship or, governance there now, made sure that a whole lot of people were able to be mobilized and they came on the street and, protested. But you saw what corporate media did. Corporate media started talking about violent protests. They were not concentrating on the peaceful protests. They were concentrating on the looting. And the looting has got its own economics. People who don't have, they are the ones who go and loot. And when you saw the pictures of the looters, they were both black and white, which meant that both the black and white people who went to loot were in need of some economic, some economics. That's why they went to loot. But then the most important thing is that what happened with George Floyd came right onto the screens, not only of Americans, but it also galvanized the whole lot of people outside America and focused on the problems of racism. But I want to emphasize that racism is not just, it's not genetic. White people are not born to dislike black people. Neither are black people born to dislike white people. They come into an environment where systematically, through the education system, through the political system, through the economic system, through the justice system, they are indoctrinated to look at people differently. In England, in Ireland, oh, you are a Catholic, I'm a Protestant. You understand? In Ghana here, I'm an Ashanti, you are a Gan. You understand? In the United States, you are an African American and I'm white. Even in the United States, you are Latino, you are an Irish American. You understand? And this kind of discrimination goes on in a widespread fashion. It's also against the immigrants, especially labor. And that is why, for example, in certain parts of Western and Southern United States, the Latinos are the focus, are the brunt of the racism system in the United States of America, whether at the workplace, whether at the courts, that's the justice system, whether in the prisons, wherever they find themselves. They are placed apart in order to ensure that some people will be at the top of the pie. So racism is used as a social construct, is used by the exploiter to control the oppressed, divide and rule the exploited. And racism like tribalism, sexism, religious sectionalism, stereotyping of minorities are used for domination by a ruling elite or regime to further their political, social, and economic interests. Like I told you that in history, it's not only blacks who were discriminated against. American Indians were discriminated against. They brought what we call indentured labor from India to the Americas to work. Chinese were also at a certain time discriminated against. There was Chinatown, which was off limits. You understand? So anytime a minority is there, in spite of your color, you are likely to be discriminated against by the dominant force. And where the dominant force sees that you have the same thing in common with their downtrodden, then they will use the racism card in order to divide the two of you. I told you that in America there was the emancipation in 1863 when the slaves were emancipated during the Civil War. After the Civil War, the blacks were doing very well. Some became senators. Some became members of the House of Representatives. Black inventors came up, etc., etc. But within a very short time of 10 or 15 years, there was a clamp down, and they started clamping down on them. One of the ways they used to clamp down on them is to miswrite the history, is to deny the facts of history. So many black inventors were denied that they were the inventors. The first person to get to the American to get to the North Pole was a black man, but he was only recognized in the 2000s. The person who was in charge of that expedition, who could not walk to the place, was the one who was given that accolade as having been the first person, and he was white. You just take the Google or our computers and everything, and Google for beauty. The kind of image you see is of a white person. Indeed, even the white person you see, it is the white person who is a blonde, the iron. And that kind of theory, that kind of racist theory was the bedrock of fascism. Fascism in Italy, fascism in Germany. And that's what gave them justification for even discriminating against the Slavs, who are also white and blonde, like the Ukrainians and the Russians. I understand. So racism is not only used against blacks. At various times in history, it has also been used against brown people, against Indians, etc., etc. And I'm sorry to say there are some black Afrocentrics who have also tried to bring out the specter and push for black racism, although it is not that widespread. I've told you about lynching and the Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow was a term given to the kind of laws which brought about segregation in the United States of America. And of course, some of the blacks accepted it. I mean, they are the people who call the Uncle Toms. He says, no. Just abide by it, what they say. Don't do anything to anger them. You understand? That has been passed. But then people like Du Bois and others rose up and fought against it and brought about the idea of Pan-Africanism, which united black struggles all over the world. That the struggles against racism in America, against economic exploitation in America, against political exploitation in America was not focused or, only in the United States. It was worldwide, and the struggles of the blacks, whether in the colonial world then or in the Americas, should merge together. That's what brought about Pan-Africanism. And that Pan-Africanism fed into the civil rights fight in the United States. It led to laws which changed certain things. For example, in the United States at a certain time, black children could not go to the same school as white children. There had to be a ruling in the Supreme Court which changed that. federal soldiers had to escort the black children, 2 or 3 black children, into the classroom. There was a near revolt in the South. They had to take the fight of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and others to fight for the civil rights. And laws changed not because the ruling elite wanted to change the laws. Laws changed because it morphed into the Vietnam War, which led to a revolt by the middle class in America, because their people were getting killed, their children were getting killed in Vietnam. So the war movement, or the peace movement at that time, but the anti-war movement, morphed into together with the civil rights movement. And that's what forced the elite in the United States of America, especially Lyndon Johnson in 1965, to make those laws which allowed black voting rights and black access to a lot of things. But institutional racism still remained. And whether economically, politically, some of the blacks did well. You saw them in Congress, etc., etc. But economically, and the judicial system was such that it still suppressed the blacks. And the majority of prisoners in the United States of America are black people. The majority of poor people in America are black people. People who live in slums in America are black people. People who eat from the garbage are black people, not because they don't want to work hard. It's because they are miseducated or not given access to education or equal access to education. You realize that drugs, the drug culture, was at a certain time promoted by corporate media, especially amongst the blacks. It was hip to be a rebel, but your rebellion should take the things of counterculture. You taking drugs, you dressing in some kind of way, etc., etc. You know, most of the shoes, canvas shoes of Nike and all this, they were selling to the black people. There was very little black investment. And where the blacks were doing well, before you realize corporate America has entered, bought up the place, and moved the blacks away from there. So it is indeed welcome. I won't say it's welcome. I mean, that gruesome murder has awakened all of us once again. But the fight against racism is not an event. It's a process. And that process is a multifaceted process of fighting against at various in various ways, against racism. We have to fight against racism politically. We have to fight against racism economically. And it's not enough just to want to achieve equal status. It's most important for investment amongst the minorities, for the minorities to be able to also provide their quota like everybody else. Indeed, it's a myth to say that it's white people who created everything. It's not true. The facts don't bear it out. It's a myth to say that, oh, white people created America, they created Europe. It's not true. We are now seeing statues of slavers, slave owners, etc., being pulled down in Liverpool, etc., etc. It is slave money which built Manchester and Liverpool, which created the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain, which has created, is it Barclays Bank or Standard Chartered? See, that same money, that same capital, which has been reproducing, which created those two banks, which created the wealth of Rothschild, a French billionaire family, and others. It was built upon the blood and sweat and toil of black people. But it is not recognized. And we have to fight for it to be recognized. And one of the things we ought to do is for us to know ourselves, to know our history. If black people built the pyramids thousands of years ago, How could they have done it without science? How could they have done it without mathematics? How could they have done it without architecture? How could they have done it without transporting all those blocks, you know, or how to cut it into perfect squares, etc., and place it? And what kind of cranes took those stones up there? Could it have just been mere human labor? Or it also had human intellect? If you read about Herodotus, he admits that they've stolen a lot of knowledge from Egypt, ancient Egypt. But now, ancient Egypt is even painted white for us. You had Napoleon using a cannon to try to blast off the nose of the Sphinx, because the nose of the Sphinx was typical Negroid. And for them, it was impossible for Negroes to have carved out the Sphinx. In fighting against racism, there shouldn't be reverse racism. We should simply understand that the human beings are all the same everywhere. I mean, the law of equality is just like the law of gravity for all of us. And concentrate on economic, political, social, and judicial emancipation. I think, Kwesi. Yeah.
Well, comrades, that was the thoughts of Justice Hineku, Secretary of the Socialist Forum of Ghana, and the official historian of the movement on George Floyd and racism in the United States of America. We are going to change the program a little bit. At this stage, we're going to read the messages from those of you at home and so on. But the producers have told me that we should start with the studio audience first. So for those of you who are in the studio, this is the time to ask your questions and to make your comments about the presentation that has been made by Justice Hineku. And you can ask any question about racism in the United States of America. You can ask any question about racism anywhere in the world, and you are free to make comments. Shall we see those who want to start this conversation? Just raise your hand. Those who want to start a conversation, just raise your hand. We don't have a lot of time. I see 5 persons who want to start a conversation. So what we're going to do is that we're going to start from you, and then we come to you, and then we come to you, and that will be the first 3, and then we'll follow up later.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I want to ask, can racism ever stop? Can it ever stop? Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, comrades. Mine is just a comment, because I've been following this George Floyd matter. In fact, it is very sad. And one thing that is making the people of US annoying is the president. In fact, since the matter came, the president has never comforted the people. In fact, the former defense minister for Obama came out and said he has never seen a divided president on this earth before. And I think George Floyd murder has opened the eyes of the world. In fact, no human being is illegal in this world. So I hope this will continue, and there must be justice in this world and George Floyd. Thank you very much.
Good evening, comrades. In fact, we are in the 21st century whereby information is being poured out, but it seems racism is still on its rampage, and you can see African leaders which have succumbed to the Western leaders. You know, About last year alone, Donald Trump said Africa is a shithole. But yes, South African leaders ran to Donald Trump begging for arms. And how can we know our leaders are also aware of racism. How can our leaders be educated and yet still succumb themselves to the Western world, which makes us on self-reliance? Because if we are self-reliance here in Africa, then we can question the Western world. We can question their leaders as well. So how can our leaders be on their feet but not always be begging to the Western world? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, racism, can it ever end? I told you that racism manifests itself politically, economically, socially, in the justice system. Indeed, the state is even used, like the police, which is an apparatus of the state, is being used in an institutional way to discriminate against minorities. But racism can be stopped. An example of it is in Cuba. There used to be a lot of racial discrimination in Cuba, official racial discrimination against the black people in Cuba. But during the years of the revolution, the incidence of racism in Cuba is only probably at the social level. And through education, that is being combated, and that probably can be combated. But politically, yes, of course, legislation can fight against racism. Economically, if you allow all minorities to have equal access to the pie, it can fight against racism. If you create a judicial system which is fair, you understand, the judicial system in Ghana here, for example, it's okay for the rich people, but it's against the poor people. A hungry person who goes to steal cassava gets more years than a bureaucrat, educated, political elite who steals billions of cedis from the public purse. You understand? Socially, like I told you, we acquire it from our environment, the people we grew up with, our perceptions, myth, untruths. Because, like I told you, there were strenuous attempts to prove that blacks were inferior. Even to a certain time, they tried to turn blacks into like animals in a zoo. There was a World Trade Fair in the United States of America in 18-something, and they brought some black people from the Congo, pygmies, and paraded them even as late as the 1910s, and paraded them as part of the zoo exhibits in New York City and elsewhere. They tried to measure the head of the black man, his brain, everything. You know, eugenics, a science especially by the Nazis, tried to see the differentiation between the intellect of various human species. We were told that, oh, blacks were just next after the apes. But like I said, practice and what we have built. Even in Ghana here, we don't have much, but what we have built since 1957 till now, the white people did not build it for us for 100 years of colonialism, which means that we are capable of doing something. Now, to talk about our leaders, one thing you ought to understand is that the relationship between our leaders and the Western world is subservient, but it's also economic, and it's also security-wise. Any black man or African who tries to bring emancipation, real liberation, they will destroy you like Kwame Nkrumah. They will destroy you like Thomas Sankara. They'll cut you off. And they'll use your own people to cut you off. Just like they use our own people to catch raid for slaves and sell them. Created an economic system which we also got involved. Some people made money out of it. Blacks, I mean, made money out of it. Although it favored the Europeans much more. You understand? Our leaders, when they steal money from here, they can only secure it when they go and put it in the European bank vaults. It is when they misbehave or when it becomes too apparent that the Europeans would try to shame them by talking about it. But even then, how many of these monies, whether it's Mobutu's stolen loot or Bokasse's stolen loot or Bongo's stolen loot, has been repatriated to Africa? None, or very little. Abacha's, they gave very little of that money to us, to the Nigerians. You understand? So the elite in Africa are an elite because they are dependent upon the security and the economic aid of the subsidies of the Europeans. So till we break it, or till there is a revolution up. When I say revolution, it could either be through fiscal means or through the mindset that no, we ought to do things for ourselves and that we are capable of doing things for ourselves. Whether we do it well or we don't do it well, it is for ourselves. So that's, I have my doubts whether that umbilical cord between the elite and the Europeans will be cut. But then we must always understand that there's a difference between the people, the mass of the African people, and the elite. Because sometimes we say, Africans, why? We are not moving forward. It is our elite who are not moving forward.
Well, we're going to read some of the messages that we've got in so far. And Natty Baby Antoinette says that she's watching. Jim Soa has a question. My question is, why would the whites who brought us this so-called religion look down on us? Why would the whites who brought us this so-called religion look down on us? And then there is Kwame Bento. Kwame Bento writes on Facebook, I think we blacks have reacted rightly to what our Pan-Africanists saw. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, who were assassinated before their time. Sam Dokenu writes, Justice Hineku, you are right on point. Segregation has not vanished completely in America. There are still white no-go areas. Tamid Isaka writes, racism itself is a symptom of an entrenched class system where a poor, illiterate, homeless white man still feels superior to a well-educated career black man simply because for centuries his Caucasian race have been in charge of global wealth. Not even an Obama presidency could buy black America any respect and dignity. The way out is a dismantling of that class system which continues to preserve the prevailing inequalities. And then Rich Noble Banks poses a question. Is racism against blacks only? I'm sure that Justice has taken notes of this, and we'll come back to the studio and take a few more questions and contributions. Can I see the hands up? So we'll take two for now. We'll take you, and then we'll take you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Justice. I've been very fascinated about the energy and the courage of the people that poured out onto the street to demand justice for a system that has exploited them for a very long time. I don't know what your analysis would be, but I'm worried because even though these energies are good, there's a lot of courage. I am worried about the unavailability of a political instrument that can give a certain direction, to this energy, so that we don't have a replication of what happened in the Arab Spring. And it's also important to understand that with this majority of people that are on the street, the enemy also puts people on the street. And what they do is to dilute, the essence of why people are on the street. So I wanted you to put some light in terms of that these people that are out there, there's no direction, there's no political instrument that can direct that energy into real change. The other issue I want to mention is a concept you use about minorities, which then presupposes that there are majority. And then what these concepts do, in my view, is that it clouds the class nature of the struggle. And then you yourself mentioned a reverse racism, something Karl Marx classically mentioned, anti-racist racism. Because when you put these divisions, what it does is that the majority and the minority and the class nature in which will form that alliance is missing, because people in the majority, people in the minority have the same class relations, and then that distinction clouds that class essence of the struggle, and I thought that you should put more light on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say we do not seek to replace, like Comrade Justice has rightly said, to replace white supremacy with black supremacy. That is not the case. But in the course of your presentation, you mentioned that there was a time, especially in America, where black folk was doing very well, until after a while it plummeted. And then we went back to what we have today. Now, what I want to understand, well, that's my view. I stand to be corrected, and anybody could kick against it. But I don't think any kind of institutional change or systemic change now is going to bring about a stop to racism. I think until the working class come together and realize that racism, like you rightly said, is just a tool used by the oppressor, and until they rally together, irrespective of what color you are, and know that this is a tool used against them and must fight, that is the working class, the ordinary people themselves. No amount of institutional change is going to give them that, because the very people in the institutions who are making these policies will always make it in favor of the rich and in favor of corporations. Thank you.
Yeah, the question on religion, like I indicated, religion is different from your spirituality or your faith. But religion is a system which has been constructed. And religion is also used as a tool to divide or to calm down the working people, to promise you of a good life after a hard and stony, work on earth here. You get a good life elsewhere. So you have to store your riches up. That's what the religion or the Christianity, for example, teaches us. And when you go into all sorts of religions, that's how. And religion has been taken and hijacked by the elite at various epochs in history in order to maintain their power. Whether it was the elite in Europe through the popes and the bishops. At a certain time in Europe, most of the lands and the wealth and the riches were owned by the church till the revolutions of the 19th century, which broke the power of the church and took away most of the lands because capitalism was advancing. So I agree, religion, yes, they brought religion, but they brought religion in order to cower you down, in order to be able to colonize you and make you subservient and separate you from the real focus of what they are doing. Of course, they also use religion as the basis, as the spiritual basis to come and collect what you had. The Pope, Pope Clement is called, said that all heathens, that's non-believers in one God, the Christian God, their women could be raped, their women could be taken into forcible marriage, their men could be enslaved, their property is taken. Because it is a right of those who subscribe to that religion to do it. And that was the basis for them coming down here to do what they did. That is not to say you have to reject whatever religion you are in, but then that's to bring up to your mind that religion has not solved the problems. It has rather engendered violence in the history of mankind. And the last time, it was just in Northern Ireland. Britain, a Protestant country, suppressing the Irish Catholics. You go to many parts in Europe, the same. Racism against blacks only. No, racism is not against only blacks. I mentioned that there was racism against the Chinese. There was racism. Racism is based upon differences. That this person is different. And so because he's different, he has a certain deficiency. And so that makes me superior. And I'm like I was saying that it is not genetic. It's not born. It's human beings who have sat down and constructed it, who have invented it. It has been invented by white people, it has been invented by black people, especially amongst black people, it is through tribalism. It has been invented by men. Amongst men, it is called sexism, where we discriminate against women. You go to India, they have even the caste. So it is differentiation and discrimination, based upon differences. And that's where I talk about minorities. It's very easy to discriminate against minorities because they are few. But the discrimination against minorities is to assuage the fears of the oppressed majority, of the oppressed amongst the majority. So for the blacks, for example, in the United States, because some of the whites were as poor as the white black slaves, or even poorer. You understand? I don't know whether you have watched Roots or you have read Roots. You understand? It is vivid in it. They were that poor, and they had common cause with the blacks. But if they came together and saw that, oh, there was an exploiter group of people, so it is that exploiter group, or you are not like the Hoosiers. In Ghana, people have dreamt about it. Oh, you are not this, you are not that. Understand? So racism is not only against blacks. Then the energy you are talking of, yes, I agree. It doesn't seem as if there's a unified leadership for the protest in the United States. But I believe that the grassroots leadership and leadership of Black Lives Matters, is giving a certain impetus to the protest. But a unified leadership with clear-cut political goals and aims, I don't think exists amongst this protest. And that's why there's a need for, in every society, to have a vanguard and revolutionary party in order to be able to galvanize this kind of energy, in order to be able to attain those kind of political and economic ends.
We are getting a lot of messages from all over the world, and I'm going to try and read as many as I can before we come to the last contributions from the studio. This one is from Dinah from Equiapim, and Dinah says, "Good evening. Thank you, Comrade Justice, for the education. I agree with Thomas Jefferson that a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. Power to the people. Power to the people." And this is from Dinah from Equiapim. This says simply, Uncle Pratt, thanks for bringing up this topic for discussion. The speaker is simply good. And it is from Amankwa from Kumasi Ato. And it says, Justice Akufu Hineku, thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. From Justice, this message is also from Kumasi. This one says, "Hello, I love your program by Akufu Hineku, but says that please try and sanitize the microphone to avoid COVID-19. That's an interesting warning. This is from Dr. Bequin from Moscow in Russia. And Dr. Bequin says, "Good evening, comrades. How are we dealing with chauvinism amongst blacks, as this is the worst form of racism?" As this is the worst form of racism. This one is from Sani Ima, and Sani Ima is from Nigeria. And Sani Ima writes, "Greetings, sir. Please, what can we as individuals do to fight racism that has eaten deep into every system in the world?" This says, talking about self-reliance, is our economic and political salvation dependent on our unification as Africans? And this is from Kingsley Sewonu. It's a problem with the machine. Kingsley Sewonu. Something just happened to the machine. And okay. Kingsley Sewonu. From the Kingsley Sewonu Chinderi, from the Oti region. From the Oti region. This one says, "Please, I want to ask, is it safe for Africans to go there anymore for education and for job opportunities, I suppose, the United States of America?" And then lots more messages. This one says, "My name is Azombo from La Paz. Is it true the French-speaking African countries have signed a common currency agreement and will have to put their reserves in France? In France, their colonial master." This is from Sir Bauer from Yendi. And Sir Bauer says, "Nice lecture, comrade. I want to know if President Obama's assumption of office has changed anything to the expectation of African American communities. The pulling down of historic statues is a step in the right direction." Comrade Bauer from Yendi, Sir Bauer from Yendi writes again, "Comrades, is it possible for African Americans to be compensated and repatriated to Africa?" And repatriated to Africa. This is a long one. It says, "Hi, my name is Maggie. I would like to say that Africa must stand up for we cannot be under white people forever. These white people hate us blacks, but we always love them so much. The time has come for black people all over the world to stand together. We must send a message to these whites that enough is enough. Black people need to educate themselves, to know that we are all equal or even better than them. It's time to be united. Our governments must fight against this racism against any black person. Look, when China treated black people badly, no African leader called for boycotts against China, and they did not stop business with China. Our government must be bold. And Maggie continues, we need respect from these white people. And then she goes on and on and on. The message is getting a bit difficult. This one says, Uncle Pratt, today we are not in a traditional way. Oh? Why? Good evening to you and your noble guests. And it's from Pelpo Mba. Pelpo Mba writes again, Uncle Pratt, today we are not in a traditional way, and so on, so on, so on. This one says, Uncle Pratt, thanks for bringing up this topic for discussion. The speaker is simply fantastic. And it's from Amankwa from Kumasi. This one is from John Otibo from Tema. And he writes, it's about time anything African must be appreciated by Africans in the diaspora and avoid anything Western. The fundamentals of curbing racism. In solidarity with the movement, we can undertake to stop bleaching our skins, stick to our natural hair, speak our Zulu Tree or Igbo at our offices where applicable. Stop wearing those ugly artificial nails that make us look like star, 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 star. At least these actions will communicate to the rest of the world that Black Lives Matter. That Black Lives Matter to the U.S. and that we believe in ourselves first. And this is again from John Otibu from Tema. Robert from Nabrongo writes, thank you, Kweku. I am happy for this forum. I believe that if this is taken throughout all TV stations, many will understand racism. This is from Dr. Bequin from Moscow. This is the second message Dr. Bequin is sending. And it says, how are we dealing with chauvinism among black people? And that is a worst form of racism. That is indeed a worst form of racism. Our telephone calls are interfering with us and making it very, very difficult for us to read these messages. This one is about birth certificates and the voter registration exercise, and I like to skip that. That's not what we are discussing. It says, if racism religion was a tool by oppressors against us, why can't we develop a new tool to change the perception of the people? And this is from Josiah from Takrady. I think we'll take the last comments from the studio and then we'll invite Justice to briefly bring us to a close. So, last comments from the studio. Can I see the hands? Okay, so we're going to start from you and then come to you and then go to you. And then 3 comments from the studio audience, and then Justice will make his closing remarks. Yeah, okay.
Good evening, comrades, and good evening to our church viewers. I would like to start from what 2 of the statements George Floyd made when he was passing out. He said he can't breathe, and that has been the catchword or the catchphrase that is running around. But he also said something that is very profound. He was calling the mom. He said, Mama. And I want to believe that symbolically, Mama is calling on Mama Africa. I mean, if you look at the uproar or what is happening, the demonstrations in the US and some happening in the UK, in Germany, and you look at our continent, Mother Africa, there is nothing significant going on. Nothing significant. And it seems to suggest we have betrayed our own people. I don't know what AU is meant to do, but I thought AU could take advantage of this situation to make a strong statement in support of our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. And once again, AU has failed us. Comrade Hinaku said something about racism not being with only blacks. I would like to draw it a bit closer home. I think that oppression in general is something that we must all eschew or fight against. We as Ghanaians, we are in this country where when you are classified as an internee or someone from a certain tribe or ethnic group, you are not deserving of certain privileges or certain positions. And these people who push strongly some of these notions are the same people crying and saying that we can't breathe. If you can't breathe because George Floyd is no more, and you are oppressing or putting your brother from the same country or from the same continent through similar situations, then it is better you are not even alive. I am worried because few days ago some youth organized themselves to have a vigil in support of this same event, and our security apparatus went in there and arrested the leader of the peaceful demonstration. Immediately what came to our mind is that when you start, or when the hegemony tries to suppress or make free speech or free expression seem to be a crime, then there is something criminal they are hiding from us. But one other thing that I've gotten to know through these demonstrations across the US is that when you suppress the people so much, in their quietness, they are finding another means to manifest. So when that opportunity comes, they will manifest. And this goes to the government of Ghana and all the people around Africa, that we should be each other's keepers. If we don't do that, the silence of the people will manifest in a different way that we might not be able to contain. Thank you. Yeah, Doc, thank you very much. I quite remember I had a problem with Chinese, one guy Chinese in my company, and when we went to the police station, immediately they saw the white facts. They sent the case, and another day they turned the case on me. So it tells us that racism is not, it goes far, 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 far away. And we have to come together so that we can fight this racism. Because I always say that no human being in this world is illegal. No human being in this world is illegal. So we need to come together and fight this racism. Thank you.
We still have a few more messages, and I'm going to read them very, very quickly, and then we would invite Justice to give his closing remarks in 2 minutes. Wow. This is from Rich Noble Banks, and Rich Noble Banks says blacks should highly increase the prices of raw materials the whites patronize most, like gold, cocoa, timber, cotton, and oil. Diana Wood, thank you, Comrade Justice, for the education. I agree with Thomas Jefferson that a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. Renz Mawulia Palu says, good evening, comrades. I like that you gave comments on Ernesto Yeboah's arrest when he led a vigil in honor of George Floyd and others who suffered injustices by one way or the other. Secondly, I would also like to ask, what can we Africans and our leaders at home and the diaspora do formally to curb racial discrimination in all endeavors? And then Edwina Okwajo says, good evening to the Socialist Forum of Ghana for educating us on this topic, for we feel only blacks are those who suffer from racism and therefore are not proud of our color black. So this is the time to draw the curtains, and it's my pleasure to invite Justice Hineku to give his concluding remarks. 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, we applaud all those who have protested and manifested in various ways the abhorrence of this injustice which was done to Floyd and which daily is being done against blacks and other minorities all over the world. As far as repatriation of blacks from the Americas, I do not agree to it because blacks built America. Of course, I mean, America is for the Amerindians, the native Indians. But when you talk of America today, it does not belong to Europeans. It belongs to all those who live in and all those whose ancestors built it. How do we fight racism? I think it should be a daily thing. A daily thing of appraising ourselves of our history, of bringing our African personality to the fore. That's why Kwame Nkrumah taught us the African personality, a belief and a confidence in ourselves, trying to engender the African Renaissance so that we go back, know our history, know our civilization, for it to guide us so that we can be self-reliant and economically, politically, and socially emancipate ourselves. Thank you very much.